Welcome to You Rise Me Up, a podcast about Asian Europeans from all walks of life. I'm your host, Ching, a German-born Chinese. Today with me, Ronald Metschies, the project lead for promoting Ukraine's sustainable economic recovery at the GIZ, a prominent German development organization. After studying politics and public policy in the UK, Germany, and Japan, Ron went on to work for the GIZ in Manila, Beijing, and now Berlin, advising different government ministries on strategic international projects. Ron grew up in Germany with a German father and a Filipina-Chinese mother. We met as colleagues while working at the GIZ in Beijing and reconnected after he moved back to Berlin in 2023.
Thank you so much for taking the time, Ron.
Thank you for having me, Ching Ching. Super excited to be on this podcast.
Yeah, it's been a long time in the making, right? So, Ron, we know each other from Beijing, and I know that your dad was German and that your mom is basically Filipino-Chinese. So I know that you are basically, I know it sounds silly, but like half German, quarter Chinese, and quarter Filipino. We've definitely talked about it before, but I keep forgetting the exact story behind it. What is actually your family story? How did your parents meet and how did they end up in Germany?
My dad is from Gelsenkirchen in Germany, a very German guy. And my mom, she grew up in the Philippines, but her dad was from China. She was at the time like a private teacher / nanny for a sheikh from the United Arab Emirates. They were on a vacation in the UK, and then she did a trip to see a Filipino friend in Germany. And that's when she was introduced to my dad. And they really hit it off and kept seeing each other. According to her, it was love at first sight. And the rest is history. She would always repeat that part. She was on vacation in Germany, not the other way around. I would be like, oh, I get it, Mom, you're on vacation here. It's not that exciting. I don't know why. But then with all the connotations of Asian woman marrying an older German man, now later, I got much more why she would always be so proud that I was on vacation in Germany. It's not like you picked me up in Southeast Asia and brought me here, you know?
I'm also curious because you mentioned to me before that you have half siblings, right?
Yes. So both were widowed when they met. And my dad had a German son with his first wife. And then my mom was married before as well in the Philippines. And she has 2 children. They're older than me. And they're basically my half siblings from the Philippines.
And then what was your experience like growing up in Germany? You mentioned to me before that you had quite a different experience from your sister, for example, who was fully Asian, and that the fact that you would have German, that affected the way that you perceived yourself and how you related to the German culture, right?
Yes. To be honest, there's been moments before we started our podcast together where I was thinking, am I Asian enough for Ching Ching's podcast?
Oh my God.
But I think from a perspective that growing up, I did not perceive it as much as a problem. I didn't have that many issues, also compared to my sister. So my sister came to Germany when she was 8 years old. And so she's also the one I grew up with. My half brother from the Philippines was already 16 at the time when he came over to Germany. And then he started a vocational training and so on. So he wasn't living with us. And my half sister, we grew up together. So when you're 8 years old, coming to Germany to a very small town, you don't speak the language. So she had to catch up. In primary school, she was 2 years behind and was working very hard to get ahead. And I still remember it was in 4th grade in Germany back then. They would decide already if you get to go to the basic school, if you go to high school, and then you have a chance to study in the end. And at the teacher parent day, her teacher, she was basically, oh, well, this is going to be a short meeting, because it's very clear that she should go to basic school. Like she's barely passing the grade. She's all right, but it's not like an exceptional talent or anything, obviously looking at the grades. And my dad would be very angry with her, stating that within 2 years, she caught up to a level to pass in primary school from basically 0 to that level. And now she would be telling her to go to basic school, even though she's shown such a exceptional hardworking spirit and talent. And my dad pushed her to go to high school. And my sister finished with a Fachabi. So she didn't finish high school completely, but she still got the degree to go to university. So I think that was an important inflection point for me as well. I heard also for a lot of Turkish immigrants, when the parents don't know the school system, they would just trust the teachers. Teachers in small towns not necessarily have that bigger picture, even though the parents trust them. That would be maybe a challenge that my sister had to get there. And I think German was always the worst class for her. She was always complaining and she was barely passing. And when she moved later on to southern Germany, I think it was Baden-Württemberg in the south of Germany, I still remember she called me and she was so excited. For the first time in her life, she had a B in German and she was so proud. And she was like, well, they all can't speak German properly, like Hochdeutsch, High German.
Hey, I'm from Baden-Württemberg and we do speak proper German.
You still can't pronounce my name. You always say Ronald.
Wait. But that I do jokingly, right? Wait, how do you pronounce your name correctly?
Ronald.
Ronald? Really?
Yes, of course.
Shit. Oh my God. I would say Ronald.
Okay, I've called you Jing Jing for the longest time. So.
That's true.
Yeah, fair and square.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I was thinking, compared to my sister who struggled a lot more, it was much easier for me. Thanks to your invite and speaking on the podcast, I was reflecting a little bit more on some situations in primary school, which I remembered now. My mom would go once a year back to the Philippines. We have some properties there. So she would stay there for like 6 weeks for a whole vacation. And then she came back and she would bring fresh mangoes, very delicious ones from Southeast Asia, And one time my dad suggested to bring some to class to share with my classmates because they probably never tried mangoes back then. I'm so old. Back then they didn't have them in the supermarkets. And I still remember how my teacher cut them up and everyone got a little piece to taste them. And how the local German kids would look at me so strangely, like, oh, this tastes weird. And then I could see in their eyes, oh, he's the weird kid. He eats weird stuff. So that's like one memory I had. I was just like, oh, why did my dad make me bring this? Now people think I'm weird. And I'm not sure how it was where you grew up. Where I grew up, we would go to hang out with our classmates in primary school still, after school directly. And I would always be so terrified of what my parents had cooked. Because when I would go to my friends, there would be some nice, very simple dishes, some fries and like cordon bleu. And every time I would go, I was like, oh my God, what did they cook today? Because they would always both cook. So my dad needed some potatoes. He would like experiment something Western style in the kitchen. My mom needed her rice. We had some days where it was sauerkraut with rice and chicken adobo, which is a very strange mix. And I would be shaking my head. But my friends, also, I think because they were the close ones visiting my home, they would always be excited. So that was cool. But that's the memory I have for these times.
That's so adorable that you brought mango to school. I actually think that's so exciting. What year was it? First of all, I always forget how old you are, like in the best possible way. And second of all, I cannot remember a time in Germany where there were no mangoes in the supermarket. So that's why I'm particularly curious about it.
It must have been around 1995, 1996.
So it was around the time that I was born. Okay.
You did that on purpose, Ching Ching, didn't you?
No, I didn't. But I didn't know that. I mean, it's like kind of obvious, but still. But like, it actually also reminds me of that one moment last year. My sister's German boyfriend was visiting us and we were eating pomelo every single day. And at one point he looked at me and he was like, what is that, that you're eating? And I was like, yeah, I love pomelo. It's my favorite fruit. And I wasn't aware of the fact that German people tend not to know that fruit because they do sell it in German supermarkets too. I've seen it and I've bought it. Yeah. And then I was like, oh, there's a pomelo. Do you want to try it? And he was like, yeah, sure. And I was like, but you need to peel it because I only peeled the outer layer, but you also need to peel the inner layer. And then I handed it to him and I turned around. And then like the only thing that I heard was my sister saying, oh no, Nick. And I turned around and he just bit into the whole thing. I looked at him like really shocked. And I was like, I told you to peel it. And he was like, I thought you had already peeled it, by peeling the outer layer. And he was like, oh, that's why it was so bitter.
I think I had these moments going to Asia though, because there's so many tropical fruits. And it's like my Filipino friends, when I was living in the Philippines for a while, they would always look at me a little bit funny because I didn't know how to eat the most basic fruits. And I still enjoy until this day to introduce durian to my non-Asian friends.
I hate durian. It stings. But like, do you like durian?
So I'm always up for a challenge, and people have told me this is like the best fruit and it's an acquired taste and it's a delicacy and it's called the king's fruit in the White Mountain tigers eat it, so I was so excited to get it and I bought like a big one. They're not cheap.
Yeah.
And then the first bite I took, I almost threw up.
Ah.
I spent so much money that I was like, I cannot waste it. So I kept trying to eat it with like these tuk-tuk crackers. And I would force myself during the course of 2 days to keep nibbling on it. And finally, I liked it. I would still feel sick, but by now I'm pretty addicted. So if I smell it, I think it smells actually very nice and I get appetite.
Well, Ron, I hope you never purchase a durian perfume because I will literally never meet up with you again.
Well, if you meet in Beijing again, you have to try the durian pizza at least. It's like the Chinese version of the pizza Hawaii, I always thought.
I'm okay. But Ron, since you mentioned that your mom would go to the Philippines pretty much every year, so her ties to the Philippines were still quite strong, but she's also Chinese Filipina. How would you describe your family culture actually? Because, whenever like people from different cultures get together and become a couple and so on, sometimes they form their own subculture. And I'm just curious to hear how you would describe your own family culture and how did you relate to your different cultures?
Oh, that's a good question. I think pretty mixed. Also because my dad's family is half French. So you would often meet my family in France. So my uncle was German. He married a French lady and all my cousins are French. So we had sometimes very nice dinners where there would be on the table some people speaking English, some people speaking Filipino. When my mom and my brother were talking, there would be some French, some Alsatian, like the local language. And all the people around our tables would always stare at us like, what's going on with this family? So I think there was always a lot of diversity in my family. There was no one subculture and so on. But I think at home, it was still mainly the very German side. And when I also went to the Philippines as a kid with my mom for the whole summer vacation, it wasn't a good experience for both of us, I think. I was so homesick when I was in the Philippines and everything kind of smelled weird and the food was different. I couldn't talk to people much. My mom was very annoyed that I was crying a lot and then always on the phone, which was very expensive at the time to call my dad. Afterwards, when I came back, I was also very happy. And then I haven't been until much later after I finished my university studies. So I think that was a mixed experience. So as you can see, I was a bit more of a daddy's boy, not so much of a mama's boy. And I think that's also because much later I would learn about love languages. I think there's a lot of discussion as well, Asian parenting and Western parenting. My dad would be always very cuddly and telling me he loves me and everything. And my mom, definitely not. But she would always make sure that all my clothes are well ironed and cleaned and there would always be food. And she would always take care of all the material things. So I didn't have to worry about any of that. But I think as a kid, you don't appreciate that so much. You kind of tend to focus more on the soft skills in love language and little gifts and what people say and how they treat you. So it took me much longer to realize that this was a language. And then if you have this kind of Asian style parenting plus demanding good grades, it's a little bit annoying if you have the other side right next to it that is like, oh, you can do whatever you want and you're great. So that was quite a contrast. Going out for the first time as a teenager, I think I was 15, going to like the local discotheque. So I feel so old. In my hometown, when I went out the door, I still remember my mom was just like, don't drink alcohol, be home before 11 o'clock. And I was just in my head like, yeah, right, mom, you're going to be asleep. It doesn't matter. And then I was at the door and then my dad came as well. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe he's also jumping on that train now. And then he was just like, try not to drink too much and try to be home before 3 o'clock. I was just like, like I felt very trusted, that. But I think that's kind of a bit of the contrast in the parenting style. So I had definitely a bit of both. And I'm not sure how it was for you when you grew up.
That's so funny, because I told a person quite recently that I think Asian parents traditionally tend to be very much acts of service. They make sure that you're physically safe, that, you have all the money you need, and they work hard to provide you with like material things and so on. But then funny enough, my dad was more like your dad. So both of my parents are Chinese, but my parents grew up in the Netherlands. And I don't know if that influenced him because my mom also grew up in the Netherlands, but my mom is very much like an acts of service person. My dad, very uncharacteristic for an Asian dad. He would always tell us that he loves us and cuddle us. And regarding alcohol, to be honest, I was so much of a quote unquote good kid, always following the rules and so on, that I avoided alcohol until I was like 18. So they didn't have that problem with me and they didn't have to worry about that.
I think even that you say that your dad was different in that way as an Asian, I think there's definitely something to it, how there's often a focus on your material well-being for Asian parents. I can see that.
What did your dad actually do? And in what ways did he inspire you? Because you said that you had a closer relationship with your dad.
I think just always being there and asking how my day was and spending most of the time with me. So he retired early as well to spend more time with me. So he was still on the side flipping houses. That was kind of his business. And apart from that, he would be usually the one to drive me to my many different activities. He would encourage me to do that. Also, when my mom was on vacation, not vacation really, it was more like a business trip, to be honest, for her to go to the Philippines in the summer. My dad would be the one organizing the vacation with my sister and I. Maybe do like a little boat trip on a river in France or these kind of things. I think the time spent and these kind of memories are what makes it also very special.
That's very beautiful. You also told me you went to the UK to study. And I distinctly remember that one time when we were at the office in Beijing and we were talking, I remember you telling me that during that time, your dad passed away suddenly and that you encountered a lot of financial difficulties because of it. And I remember feeling moved and that I admired you for your resilience, but I don't remember the details. So I was wondering if you want to share that.
Sure. I think maybe for reference, after high school, back then you still had to do the military service in Germany, or you could do like a alternative service either in Germany, or if you wanted to go abroad, it had to be something more diplomatic or like for connecting different cultures. So I chose the second one. I went to France. And one reason was also because my brother had gotten sick at the time, my German brother. He got sick with cancer and it was a lot of pressure in my household. And my dad was pretty depressed about it, of course. So I felt I needed to get out. It had been really hard on me as well. My teacher was also very supportive because I told her I got this opportunity to stay in my hometown and do this alternative service. I really want to go, but I feel I'm leaving my family behind. And she said, no, you must go for yourself and you need to do that and you can still visit, but you need to also be your own person and do what's right for yourself. So grateful for her until today because I still think that was the right choice. However, when I went to France, within that year, it was the worst year because then my dad passed away during that time. And just a few months before him, my brother had passed away. So I lost actually both while I was gone. Apart from the emotional problems, there was also a lot of financial trouble that came with that, of course. If the major breadwinner of the family is then not there anymore.
Because your father's passing was so sudden, how did you process that grief? Because it might be interesting to people who might also be going through a difficult phase or experiencing grief.
For the first weeks, months, I was very depressed. I didn't do much. And also before my studies began, suddenly there was no finances, nothing. And I just accepted a study placement in the UK where I really wanted to go to study, but I have literally like so freaking broke. Couldn't even apply for the German government funding because I inherited my dad's house. And then obviously I was not broke in a sense, but my mom also lived there. So that was not an option to sell the house. A lot of relatives were like, oh, you should just cancel that and just do like a vocational training here, support your mom, you know. That was my French family. It sounds almost more Asian, I feel. But at least my mom, she was like, no, this is your dream. You wanted to do that. You should go. So that was very supportive of her. The first semester, my brother supported me, which was very kind of him. Obviously, my family supported me. And then I went from grief to being hyperactive. I would just become student rep for different departments and then having all these part-time jobs and then still doing my studies, just keeping super, super busy until I was exhausted. It was the first time also that I ever experienced grief. And with my mom at a time, we also grieved very differently. I think when I had my depressed phase, she was in her hyperactivity phase. So that clashed quite a lot. Maybe also one interesting aspect, my dad was Protestant. My mom is Catholic, Filipina. Typically, she's very religious. My dad was not that religious. So I grew up also in Sunday school and I was in a private Catholic school in high school. So always religion around me, but I was not very religious, to be honest. And then grieving, I have a very rational brain in a way. I needed to make sense of it. Like, you know, the Bible, it didn't feel like an answer to that question of where are they gone and what is this all about if people you love so much are suddenly gone. I think this is also what university is for in a way, a process of thinking about life, about death, about meaning of life, different religions. I had a lot of interesting discussions and debates with co-students about this topic. And that gave me more perspective to see beyond religion and to come to an idea of what things mean. And I think everyone has to come to a personal conclusion. In the end, what I still tell myself up to today, what might help people who are currently grieving, is that when you feel that pain and all that hurt and sadness, that's still for me a sign that the love you feel between you and that close person, that is never gone. This is always there. And the proof that this love always exists is the pain, I think some people say it's just all the love you couldn't give because it's just too much and it will always go with you. There's certain things that remind me of my dad and I still feel sad. At the same moment, by now, I feel happiness that he means so much to me that even after all these years, I tear up. I still feel sadness. And that shows just how strong the love was between us. So I think that gives me a little bit of a bittersweet moment every time I get sad. So this is kind of my conclusion. I don't know how you dealt with grief. Does it sound familiar?
Sadly enough, I think I'm more like your mom in the sense that I have a tendency to go into the hyperactive phase straight away to distract myself, and then it hits me like later on. And also, I'm also very much like an analytical person in that sense. Like I have to make sense of experiences and tend to analyze them. But I can definitely relate to what you said, that the pain that previously felt sad, it somehow feels like a validation and reassurance of the love you shared.
And I think at the end of the day, it's always what people remember and want more of is human connection. It's like meaningful connections. And I think in that sense, looking through this lens in terms of pain, of loss, can give you validation that it was just worth it to invest that time, even if it's painful now.
May I ask what actually happened?
What happened was, actually it was my last day in France. I was just about to drive back home to my family to see my dad as well. But then my friends, they were going to Paris and they said, let's have one more weekend together and we hang out in Paris. And then I said, okay, I'll come with you. And then I go home. And then I got a call and I was on my way to Paris that my dad had passed away. And then I was obviously, world fell apart and I just drove home, not very safely, as fast as I could, with a lot of tears in my eyes. And I was like halfway through and then my sister called me and then she said, Ron, something happened to dad. He's in the hospital. He needs to come home. And I was just like, you don't need to lie to me. I already know he passed away. So I'm on my way home. And then she's like, no. Mom was so upset on the phone. She misunderstood the people in the hospital. He's not dead. He's in a coma. So he had like an aneurysm that burst and then he was in the hospital. So luckily my sister also checked and he was still alive, which was for me like, oh my God, there's a chance he can make it. So I got home. We still had 3 days at his bed in the hospital when he was in a coma. We talked to him. He was not responsive. And I still remember the last moments. I was just sharing stories with my sister next to him. We were like that day and night. And then suddenly she looked at my dad and then there was a tear in his eye. Then she was like, are you sad? Can you hear us, Dad? Are you there? And then that moment when we went to him, then the heartbeat monitor went to like the beep tone and he died. And I know there was a medical condition. Maybe there was a pressure in the head and that's the reason that he died. And there was a pressure and there's a tear coming out. But I choose to believe that he could hear us. And that was kind of a farewell moment. So that was basically how he passed away.
I have actually read that the hearing, it really is the last sense that you lose. So I think there is a chance that he really heard you.
Yeah. Either way, I would just choose to believe that. But thank you very much. I feel now scientifically even more supported in my ideas about it.
I sense deflective humor, but that's okay. Let's leave it at that. Why did you study politics and how did you actually get into the politics/policy space?
I was going to France. I worked at the World Center for Peace, Liberty and Human Rights, where they had loads of different INGOs doing conferences about political things. And then there was this scholarship program from Rotary, because I was just doing this internship there for a year. I was allowed to participate and that was eye-opening. There were a lot of Rotary kids, also from the US, from different countries in the EU. And a lot of them were also students in Sciences Po Paris and also like the elite schools. So I did the whole program with them. And at the beginning, I was very nervous, like, oh my God, I've got all these elite students here. And by the end of it, I was very surprised because we were like debating, discussing in German, English and French, and I could hold a candle to them. I didn't even go to university. So I get a bit of a feeling of, hey, I can do that. I can go to a good school. Why shouldn't I try? Because that was literally the moment when I realized there's like this whole set of opportunities. I think looking through the lens of race, definitely always an important way to see things. But I think in that case, it's also to my family background. My dad and my mom, none of them went to university. And then being exposed to these opportunities was definitely what opened my eyes that I wanted to do politics.
How did you then get like an internship at the GIZ, for example? Because the GIZ is actually a very reputable organization in Germany, especially for those who studied politics. And I also remember that I used to apply to internships when I was still in university and I never got them. And I mean, we worked together at the GIZ in the end, but also up until then, I was like, oh my gosh, this GIZ is this reputable organization to me that I just cannot get access to because I don't know anyone. My parents don't know anyone. How do you actually get your foot in the door?
I did my master's at the Hertie School of Governance here in Berlin, and they have quite close ties to GIZ. So there are a lot of students who are encouraged to regularly apply at GIZ. And at the time, I actually thought, oh, everyone who doesn't know what they're doing wants to go to GIZ. So it was not until I finally did my research that I realized that it's such a really great and in a way noble company to try to help people around the world. And it's a really fun job as well. But I think in general, you need to make sure that your degree is kind of aligned with the projects that you want to go to work for. And I think the second part is to have some relevant work experience already. And if you want a full-time job at GIZ, it's best to start with an internship. And I think it's anyways better to understand already if it's really a fit for you. My primary focus after I finished my master's degree was to go to the Philippines. So I looked into projects in the Philippines. And also on the website, GIZ, you can see who are the directors of these projects. So I emailed all of them directly with the application that was always tailored to each project. Normally, everything is through this official platform. However, sometimes if they see you have a good application, you're a good fit, you're available when they need you, either they might just start the opening of the position again online, or at least they will tell you when it's open. Maybe things have changed as well, but that's how I got my internship back then. And then it was a fit, I think.
And when you then got a full-time opportunity, did you target China or did you just happen to get the opportunity to work for GIZ in China?
So after I finished my internship in the Philippines, I wanted to stay there actually for a bit longer. It was just a perfect project and I loved it. It was promotion of green economic development. And I also loved the Filipino culture and getting to know it better. And then at this accident where I was recovering for 6 months, then I saw this opening in China. And I felt that was just the perfect opening for me because it was on international trade. It was on all these interesting topics. I didn't know at the time how difficult it is to get an internship, to get a job at GIZ. So I put all of my eggs in that one basket. And luckily it turned out well. It all worked out.
I love this naive approach to like job applications. Yeah, I mean, Beijing is also where we met, right? When you were working on this Sino-German Industry 4.0 project. Mm-hmm. And funny enough, my experience was actually quite different in the sense that people always think like, oh, if you go to universities like Oxford, for example, you automatically get a job afterwards. But that is just not true. You still need practical experience and everything else on top and to do well in interviews and so on. And so I applied to quite a lot of different jobs in different countries and eventually ended up at this US think tank in Beijing. And then like the way I ended up at GIZ, I'm not sure if I ever told you the story actually. I basically just sent out a lot of different emails and also to specific projects at the GIZ as well. And I just emailed them. I was like, hey, this is who I am and I'm very interested in your project because of XYZ. I didn't even expect to hear back, but then they invited me for an interview. And yeah, that is how I eventually ended up as a consultant at the GIZ. But one, you stayed at the GIZ for quite some time, right? And you also lived in China for a long time. What was your experience like there?
So having been in that super Asian bubble, I discovered I'm quite German, but at the same time, I realized being Asian looking, going to China, it was easier to make friends as well. So I would realize some of my Chinese friends, I would be at their birthday parties. I was literally the only Lao Wai, the only foreigner in the whole party. And I was wondering, is it because I look Asian? I just slip under the grid. And also in terms of being a consultant, when I would give briefings, people would just expect me to be this China expert. I look Asian. So I just remember at Hannover Fair, like the biggest industry fair we have in Germany, I gave a presentation. On the one hand, people were always nodding and they're like, oh, he knows what he's talking about. On the other hand, right after I gave my presentation and then people came to talk to me, the first thing they said, wow, your German is excellent. It's like, really? That is what you took away from that? And it's not excellent. It's native German. So on the one hand, there's certain prejudices that are quite stupid and annoying. On the other hand, I think there's some benefits you can have if you're at the right place at the right time. And the viewers can't see me. I perceive myself as pan-Asian looking, which I realized when I traveled a lot. I always feel like I fit in locally, which is always a nice feeling. People just assume you're local compared to when I go back to Germany, people start talking to me in English or where are you really from? I think that's a typical phrase that we all know. I think that's really interesting when you spend time in both continents and then you start laughing about it more. It used to bother me a bit more. In terms of negative in quotation marks in retrospect, I think one comment I got in the first weeks when I was working in China from a German colleague was that I've been already within a few weeks way too localized. I already behaved like the national staff. And I was just like, I wonder A, if they would have said that, if I was not Asian looking. And B, what do they even mean? Like, I thought that was quite a stupid comment. I still remember that one. But at the time, often when these moments happen, you don't even know how to react. You just smile weirdly. One time I had a personnel talk. That was quite an experience because from my supervisor, I would have expected also a certain type of cultural sensitivity because that supervisor compared me to Metschies. He was a player in the German national team who has Turkish roots. And I was just like, okay, where are we going with this? And I think in the end, I also talked to another colleague to ask for some advice how to deal with that because I thought it was a bit weird. And he got word of it and was angry. He was like, obviously, I meant not in a racist sense, but in the sense that you don't finish what you started or something like that. Like very weird, angry response when he found out that I was asking how to handle it. So on the one hand, I have the benefit of the doubt that he didn't mean any badly. At the same time, in terms of cultural sensitivity, I think this is maybe not an example that you should necessarily pick in that situation or to have some understanding if someone might get it wrong. At least me as a team leader now, this is something that I would try to think about. But if you have never been exposed to these cultural dynamics, that's probably a difficult thing to realize.
I also wanted to ask you about your more recent professional experiences, just because I think it's very interesting and relevant as well. You got sent on secondment to the Federal Ministry for Economics and Climate Action to work as a senior advisor on the ministry's initiatives and policies for rebuilding Ukraine's economy. And I know that you cannot talk about the details of it. I think you've mentioned that to me before. But I'm just very curious to hear what your experience has been like overall and if you have any anecdotes or insights to share here, because it's such an interesting topic to be working on and also very relevant one.
When I was in China, I was very moved by what has happened in Europe with the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. The media is really, really controlled and really one-sided in terms of reporting about what's happening there. So a lot of messages you get in China, people are not siding with the right side, I think, because they're fed a lot of propaganda. And so that was also really hard to take in when you're there. So that was one reason to come back. And I felt, especially looking into trying to find ways to support Ukraine's economy, I had learned a lot in China. You can say what you want about China, but in terms of industrial development, economic growth, they've done a lot of things that lifted so many people out of poverty. And they've done a lot of things right in terms of developing the economy. I felt I learned a lot of interesting ways to develop dialogue with the industry, a dialogue with the important stakeholders to find the best ways to kickstart economic growth, to attract investment. So that was my idea. And I brought that knowledge back. So it wasn't really my China knowledge that was helpful, but at least all this knowledge on supporting these processes that I brought back. And I felt it worked really well, especially working with the Ukrainians. There's so much fertile ground and so much initiative and motivation. It's very amazing to see. So in terms of the work life, it's been very fulfilling. And socially and culturally, the close friends you had for 7 years in China, they're suddenly all gone. That was also readjustments to make. Yeah, but happy to have people like you still in Berlin to reconnect with.
Yeah, it was quite a surprise when you moved back to Berlin.
What I found interesting, but also would be interesting to hear about your parents, the whole debate about immigration in Europe. I remember when there was this big wave in 2015, was it? And my mom was very understanding. Of course, we need to help, but of course, they also cannot stay. We need more means to do it. And this is not a sustainable way. And also in terms of people getting social benefits. Surprisingly, she's very proud that she always worked for the whole time she was in Germany. She always paid into the system. And I think she got also a lot of racist remarks with regards to that. Like I said, the fact that she always stressed that she was in Germany for vacation, not the other way around. It was very important to her. Not that there's anything wrong with the other way around, but I think that was something that I think is a good way of understanding what she must have experienced to always have to feel that way, to stress that. So she's quite critical in terms of immigration and that people should be much more adjusting to the German way to study German. So if you don't know who she is, if you don't hear her accent, you would think there might be someone a little bit right-wing. It's not my perspective, but I wonder how your experiences are with that.
I don't think I've really talked much about it with my parents. The only thing I remember is hearing a lot of stories from my mom about different ways in which they were on the receiving ends of discrimination and not being able to do anything about that. But I don't really recall a lot of moments where they would criticize other foreigners. But I think that's also because, as you might remember, my parents, it's actually only in recent years that they have more time to think about anything else but work and to talk about bigger topics as well. But then we don't have this habit of talking about societal issues. And oftentimes when I would talk about some societal issues, for example, I shared this article with my mom about this meeting of right-wing people in Germany, how they're trying to come up with a long-term plan to deport foreigners, including those with German citizenship that just don't fit into their worldview. And she just didn't comment on it. So we never had the discussion. I don't know if that is a conscious choice. And we don't see each other that often these days, but like once or twice a year. So we usually talk about other topics. But it's really interesting to hear that your mom has this view, because I've encountered this view before among people with an immigration background. And I'm always like really curious to understand how this view evolved. But maybe that's a question for your mom, right?
Yes, exactly. It's what I'm thinking. Like I said earlier, there is so many different lenses to look through, right? Like a socioeconomic lens, your heritage lens, and also your generational lens. Our generation is much more open-minded and more educated in a way. I don't think a lot of racist remarks or questions are necessarily meant in a bad way, but it's still ignorant in a way. However, they're also upset if you react in a certain way. Like, I didn't mean no harm, you don't have to be like that. So I think that's still a difficult topic to address.
When I wanted to ask you, given everything that we've talked about, what advice would you give your younger self?
I'm actually very happy the way things worked out. Like I described the first time I went to the Philippines, I was pretty young and I hated it. And it took me a while also to understand my mom's love language and also to see more of the benefits of being Asian. I think it's a process. The only thing that I can think about is to be a bit more patient and to not take things too much too hard. I think when you experience it, you grow through these experiences and it makes you who you are. So just take it easy, focus on the kind people in your life and just be yourself and things will work out.
Yeah, that's very true. Recently, I found a lot of people telling me that the best part of getting older is actually that you tend to care less and less, which is actually a good thing. You learn to care about the right things. So yeah, I think that's definitely a very important thing and very valuable thing to bear in mind. So yeah, thank you, Ron, for sharing and for taking part in the podcast.
I just want to say at the end again, I find the work you're doing in this initiative super important. And I will keep looking into this important identity part. And I would hope in a couple of months or years, I have a much clearer picture as well, maybe more to share and to contribute to this discussion. But again, thank you so much also for inviting me, Ching Ching. That's really a big honor.
Thank you, Ronald.
Ching Ching.
And as always, if you're a listener and enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate it if you could take the time to rate this podcast or write a review on whatever platform you're listening on. Thank you.